Now, the domains that Stoltenberg has addressed is intervention skills. So you want to be able to assess their awareness of themselves and others, their motivation and their autonomy when it comes to intervention skills. How confident is your trainee in terms of their competence in choosing and carrying out various and sundry interventions? You can see where that's going to change over time. And as it changes over time, the implication is you have to be different and employ different skills and techniques as a supervisor that understands this process. Another domain is assessment techniques. How confident is your supervisee in their ability to conduct psychological assessments and the whole 9 yards of psych assessments, choosing appropriate instruments in order to answer the referral question, being able to competently administer those assessments, being able to appropriately score and interpret them, being able to integrate all of the data into a comprehensive report that makes sense, being able to write that report, and finally being able to give feedback back to appropriate people. All that is part of the assessment domain. He also talks about, Stoltenberg also talks about the importance of assessing your supervisees' levels in the interpersonal assessment. This extends formal assessment, beyond formal assessment, and includes the use of yourself and in conceptualizing a client's interpersonal dynamics. So, for example, many of us as experienced clinicians have had the experience of dealing with someone who is very polite, very professional in their dealings. They're always saying the right thing, and you find yourself getting really annoyed at them. And it's not your usual reaction. If this happens from a patient, some of us as psychologists may start to think, okay, I'm not usually annoyed by people that are polite, but I'm really annoyed and angry. I wonder what's going on between us where I'm angry, because that's not my usual mode. That is an informal assessment. And if we can help our supervisees to accomplish this, they're in much, much better shape. And much more along the lines of developing high levels of competence in this domain. Stoltenberg also talks about the importance of assessing our supervisees in terms of client case conceptualizations. It incorporates, but is not limited to, diagnostic categories. It goes way beyond DSM and involves a deep understanding of the implications. So very recently I had a supervisee who had a very interesting case that she was stumped on. It was a young boy who just wouldn't ever be active. He wasn't active in pursuing friends. He wasn't active in school. He tried to avoid responsibility wherever he could, and didn't have an avoidant personality, wasn't particularly anxious, just never showed any initiative. And he wasn't doing well in school, big surprise. And we decided that she needed more data, so we got a complete psychoeducational done on him. Turns out the boy's mildly retarded. But because he's only mildly retarded, so that's a diagnosis. But having an appreciation that for this young man, he was smart enough to know that he's not as talented as everybody else, and that made him feel bad. So he learned through experience that if he just sits quietly and doesn't make any kind of problems, people ignore him, and then he doesn't have to feel bad. He doesn't have to be aware that he's not really understanding what's going on. That's what is part of a very deep and robust case conceptualization. What's a diagnosis? What are the implications of that diagnosis? It's something we need to be able to focus on with our supervisees. Stoltenberg also talks about individual differences. This includes an understanding of ethnic, racial, gender. This gets back to the diversity kinds of factors that we've been discussing. He also talks about assessing your supervisee in terms of their chosen theoretical orientation. So it's a formal theories of psychology and psychotherapy, as well as eclectic approaches, personal integration of how they're going to carry out and follow these different models. And for very, very beginning therapists as supervisors, helping our supervisees to choose a model that makes sense to them, rather than just going with a particularly charismatic professor. How good is your supervisee at formulating treatment goals and plans? This addresses how your supervisee conceptualizes and organizes their efforts in working with clients within the therapeutic context. Professional ethics. How professional ethics and standards of practice are intertwined with personal ethics. How does your supervisee bring in professional ethics and incorporate it into their personal sense of ethics? Some additional domains that I came up with in conjunction with some of the classes that I teach in supervision. They also talked about multicultural competencies, changing demographics, interdisciplinary collaboration. More and more as psychologists, we're working in conjunction with other disciplines, for example, physicians. So how well does your supervisee play well with others? More and more, we have to pay attention to the administrative types of duties that are part of our job. There's a new role for doctoral level psychologists. It's not unusual nowadays for our students to graduate from a doctoral program, and their first job is being director of a clinical program on the outside. Well, in order to be a good director, they have to have some administrative skill. That could be part of your supervisory kind of focus as well. And professional stress management. How do we identify and intervene in our own stressors from professional sources? Now, the IDM, the Integrative Developmental Model, especially as articulated by Stoltenberg, adopts Piaget's ideas, also a stage model of development. Borrow Piaget's ideas of assimilation and accommodation of cognitive structures in the trainee's development. So it's interesting to think about this as applied to the process of supervision. So within the process of supervision, here assimilation would refer to the process of fitting the new reality into one's current thinking. How do I understand what's going on given how I think? It's assimilation. And accommodating is making significant adjustments in cognitive organization that results from the demands of reality. Oh, so this person sitting in front of me is not just difficult. They are suffering from bipolar disorder. They're suffering from borderline personality. And I can do some reading to understand how to help them. That's a change in accommodating your cognitive structures. So Stoltenberg argues the process of assimilation occurs within levels 1 to 3, within the level they're going to assimilate, and accommodation occurs when you make the jump to a new level. You make the jump to a new level by changing your cognitive structures. That's what you want to do as a supervisor. That's what we're going to pay attention to if you want to follow the IDM type of model. So the takeaway from this is that supervisory interventions should vary according to the developmental level of the trainee within any specific domain that you are assessing.